Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I have the distinct pleasure of sitting down with North Carolina State University's Assistant Athletic Director and Director of Strength and Conditioning, Bob Alejo. Bob will also be on the docket hitting leadoff at the 2016 seminar. And today, guys, we are going to actually talk about what a sports scientist is. Bob actually put a post out on Facebook that Anthony Reyna picked up and put on strengthcoach.com. That's really just a brilliant question as to this entire new, I don't know what we want to call it, this new move towards calling people sports scientists who really are just collecting and analyzing data, which is really what we've done all along. So Bob starts out asking them a question, what exactly is a sports scientist? And then we get into, the issue with this trend of creating these new titles and the pros and cons of it, things that have come for a positive and things that have been a negative to it. We then get into the role of big data when it comes to strength and conditioning and how that's kind of fit into what we do all along. And then Bob starts talking about what he sees the difference between a scientist and science-based training, and then where the art factor of all of this fits in on top of it. We then start talking about how all of this really, it just fits into what we've been doing all along. Looking at numbers to drive your training based on the science that you can find and tying it all together to make sure your athletes are improving and performing at their highest level possible. And then we start talking about this athlete-centered model and where strength and conditioning coaches fit into it. It's really an interesting talk. Bob's a guy he's obviously seen it all, coming from multiple schools in California, UCLA and Santa Barbara, and then getting in with the athletics twice, and now coming out working at NC State. He's a guy who's actually one of the greatest resources that I've ever come across, and he's a super person, and I can't be thankful enough for him spending the time with us today to talk. I hope you guys enjoy the talk as much as I did. Let's get right to it.
Yeah.
And here we go. Coach, thanks a bunch for taking some time with us today, bud. It's an interesting topic we've got, one that a lot of people have been able to read, but let's talk about the article.
Well, so I said something on Facebook, got good responses, and essentially it's just one of those things where I mean, for lack of a better term, I'm fed up hearing about sports scientists who aren't sports scientists. It's that simple. And I'm in a profession where we're having some strength and conditioning professionals rename themselves sports scientists, and that's not true. I mean, that's not accurate. First of all, it's a misrepresentation, and I'm definitely not down with that. It took me 35 years to get what I have now: philosophy, thoughts, support, adversaries. I mean, whatever it might be. And so, just to change a title or a name that used to be something else or is something already is a misrepresentation. So, essentially what I was trying to say there, like you and I, we read athlete tracking data. Crunching numbers is nothing new to a strength coach. We've done that a long time. And frankly, the other article that should spin off of that is how, data is big right now. My question is, has data ever not been big? I mean, have we ever guessed at who should be batting fourth in the lineup? Or do we have numbers that tell us that this guy should bat fourth? Do we have some sort of intuition about who should run the third leg of the 4x1? Or did we have some statistical evidence that tells us that that's the right spot for that guy? Or our team averages in squat, vertical jump, 40. No, it's all been there. If you're not using those numbers to drive your programming, then you're guessing, you're hoping. But believe me, hope is a bad strategy. So I'm just saying that data has been big the whole time. Now, there's more data to collect and more ways to collect it now, which I think is terrific for all of us. You and I have talked about this ad nauseum. Like, this is terrific. Now, not that any data is not helpful, but I think it's all meaningful. But there's a certain amount that's only useful, either through time, skill, technology, resources in general. So for somebody to go ahead and do what you and I are doing, I think we call ourselves coaches. I know I would. And call themselves sports scientists, that's misrepresenting. There's a good chance, too, that if we take this a step further, that somebody may perhaps think that they're more qualified for a job because they're a sports scientist than I am because I'm a strength and conditioning coach, even though we do the same things. And that bothers me a lot. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers me for our profession and young, smart coaches who are coming up and perhaps could have jobs taken from them. So I just, I got tired of it, made a little statement in a short period. It was really a post, not an article. Believe me, it could be an article. But I wanted to address that topic. And I also wanted to make sure I mentioned that part of it's on us. We've taken, I think I put in the article there, I think we've taken great license in changing titles. I mean, there's got to be 8 titles out there that have the same job description. Where else and what other job is like that, right? There is nowhere. They keep their same vernacular, their same titles. Look at how many times we've changed and grouped, categorized different exercises and philosophies that already existed and changed that name 2 or 3 times instead of just leaving it the way it was. I think I've said this before. I got asked, it must have been 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I got asked at a conference one time, hey, Coach, have you ever heard of, and rattle off this huge alphabet-laden name that I had honestly not heard of. But knowing what I know, I told the guy, hey, no, I haven't heard of that. But if you tell me what it is, I'll tell you what we used to call it. And it's really the truth. I mean, I'm not trying to be, like I said, I'm not trying to be flip, but it's so you'll see some more of that coming out. I think there's lots of things that I think now I'm old enough and maybe have some impact in the industry where I could say something and it could turn the light on, at least in one guy. And if there's more, then that'd be great. But I think the stuff needs to be said.
Totally. I mean, 100%. And it's funny because a lot of people talk about this whole what our title is and who we are and what our profession is and blah, blah, blah. It's so much more than just being a strength and conditioning coach. But really, is that what we need to fight for? You know what I mean? To have a cooler title to make us feel better? I don't know. I hope not. But I think piggybacking what you're saying, the whole idea of this sports science thing, having the guy who, because really what sports science now is just deeper analytics when it comes to performance. And then coming from the guy who worked under the man who basically built the whole idea of sport analytics, I think it makes the statement even stronger.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I just like to say that look, you and I study the science, which we should, but the scientists produce the science. I read it. I'm not a scientist, but what I do, what you do, what we do is science-based. I mean, you're not going to be very good, or at least last very long, if you're not science-based, because you're just not going to get the results. So the sports science part of it, I just, I don't see athlete tracking as science. I don't. I think it's science-based, but really is it? I mean, think about it for a little bit. Is it science-based or technology-based? I mean, so if we're tracking somebody in terms of yardage, that's just, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there was pedometers, right? You could put on your hip. It wasn't very advanced, but it was as advanced as it could have been for the day. Was that science of walking? No, it was counting steps. But the environment with that yardage is produced may give you an indication of what sort of physiology is going on. And once you get that, then you can take it to the next step. But again, putting something on somebody here or wherever, I don't know that there's science. I think that's technology. Now I think there was something the other day about coaching and art. I can't remember what it was. I think Joe Ken said something about. No, I know it was Brian Mann talked about the art of programming or something like that. And I think as you start out, I was going to write something like this on that in a response to what I had on Facebook. But I think when you start out, you're just throwing stuff out there to see what sticks and see if it works. I don't know if there's much of an art to it than that. All of it's science-based. You're driving it off of science, trying to get to the right piece. But I can tell you now at the end here, I think there is a little bit of artistry in coaching and programming. Sitting there and the way I look at it is I have my yearly plan right in front of me, all 52 weeks, lists of exercises, volumes, intensities. And it's like a palette of sorts. You're getting ready to plug in intensities and things. You're going, and those intensities and games and days off and holidays, those are like your colors, and you just plug them in. I definitely think there's some artistry in, as you get older, in designing and implementing and coaching programs. But again, it's all science based. I firmly believe in the science. I mean, you can't have your own science. It's like Degrassi says, the great thing about science is it's true whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And coming back, speaking of Dr. Mann, and like we had Dr. DeWeese on last week. These guys that are actually in there performing this work where the studies are being done and statistics are being run and publications are being written, and they're working, whether they're actually the ones doing it or they're leading their PhD candidates through this research. Like, the difference between a scientist and, I believe the term was high performance coach.
Jeez.
Was that what we were calling it earlier?
Hold that. Make sure you remind me to tell you my high performance coach thing.
Yeah, or whatever the title would be for the person that does strength and conditioning and the monitoring, tracking, analytical data.
Right.
Is we're not publishing. We're not.
Right.
We're sharing. You and I, like,
yeah.
Hey, so when we're hitting heart rates like this, our readiness is like that.
Yep.
What are your guys like? Like, what training did you do prior? Do you think this? Like, we're sharing, but we're not sharing in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning.
Right.
Research. We're not sharing in the ACSM. So,
right.
I think that when you're saying, like, I think that the sports science thing was probably kind of like an easy way out to make a name.
Could have been.
And it's kind of catchy. So I'm sure people were like, "Ooh, that's cool. That sounds neat."
Yeah.
Because a lot of us, I mean, like I'm a nerd, so like that sounds catchy and cool to me. But what about your thoughts with all of that?
Well, I'd say the first thing about high performance coach is there any other sort of goal we're going for? I mean, isn't high performance coach kind of redundant? It's from the Department of Redundancy department. I mean, high performance coach. No kidding. That's what we're all doing. We're trying to get the best performance. Elite performance now, I've been thinking about this as I'm starting to prepare for my defense against some of these naysayers. Elite performance, that's difficult now because elite performance has only one category, right? Elite performance is world class, not national class, not state class, not conference class. World class. When you say, hey, I want elite performance, you have to be careful. I mean, because frankly, there's tons of schools that are never going to have elite performers ever. So to say that, hey, we're training for elite performance, that's an unreasonable goal. And you and I both know if you set an unreasonable goal for athletes, you're going to lose them because you're not going to attain them and they're not going to trust you. But elite numbers is possible. We can get elite squats, elite bench presses, elite vertical jumps. You and I have seen that in our day. Mm-hmm. The kids may not be elite athletes, but again, that's not our charge, right? So when I hear high performance coach, it tickles me a little bit. Like, what else would you expect to try to do to get the best performance? Yes. And along the lines of what you're talking about, fixing that title up, I think we'd all agree that most of this impetus is coming from Europe, where they have I wouldn't say performance models, but they have a model of performance staffs. And as I said in that article, I will tell anybody who will listen, I'll stand up on top of the desk and proclaim it to be true that the best athletic performance team model is one where the athletic trainers, strength and conditioning specialists, um, sports psychologists, and nutrition is all into one. You could add therapy if you have that sort. I mean, in Europe they have this wider group of folks where you have, you know, rehab strength and conditioning coaches, so on and so forth. But those all work as a team. Like they're all together every day because what we do, Jay, happens every day. Either we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or all of those things every single day. We're encountering it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as if somebody can supervise that bi-monthly. It's got to be somebody who's in charge. And if you're good at what you do in this business, you've led staffs, we all speak the terminology, we've all been involved with rehab, we've been involved with nutrition. I mean, the first sports nutritionists on campus were strength coaches, and in some places it still is strength coaches. And so I think the most viable candidate for that, if they're successful and experienced, is a strength and conditioning coach. He should be the director of that group. One director. All those other disciplines are underneath where it should be, where coach comes to me and say, how's Jay DeMayo's rehab going? I pull open his folder, and I've got all that stuff right here. Well, coach, he's training 3 times a week, lower body modified, upper body full go. He's getting rehab every day at 2:15. He's meeting with the doctor a week from Monday. Sports psychologist is keeping him straight, keeping him excited and enthusiastic, even though he's going to be down for 6 weeks. There you go. Instead of him having to make 4 phone calls or have 4 conversations or have me not know what those other things are doing or nutrition not knowing what strength and conditioning is doing. It's got to be one thing. So I'm all about that model.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the title right now, sports scientist, I'm not buying it. Unless you're taking, like I said, you're taking muscle biopsies and EKGs and determining what's happening there and solving the scientific problem. But in terms of, high performance, again, barring from a system that's had that title, but that high performance is just a title. What we need is an athletic performance team. And that's what we need. And I think we can do that here, although I will say it sounds to me like in most places that, and I could be wrong here, but not here in the States, that everybody gets they're a little selfish about who's talking about their stuff, instead of saying, oh, by the way, aren't we talking about the kids here? We're not talking about you. We're not going to talking about your staff or your unit. We're talking about how your unit helps the kids. That's probably not as common as we'd like it to be.
100%.
Yeah.
And I love that you're talking about that athletic performance model because we're starting to see that pop up in our sport,
Right.
especially in the NBA.
Yep.
Who would be the figurehead in all of that is always open for debate, or if it would almost just be one person who has to. That just is their management role. It's just that. They don't do other things.
Right.
But I think that whole building from, people, like when we were up in Boston last summer, a lot of people were talking about how you can't have silos and things of that nature. But I think it's more like you need to have silos, but it needs to be built like the Olympic rings, where everybody can kind of work together and build these things in a little bit. So it's like when we see issues that arise in those situations, it's like a strength coach is doing a little bit too much PT for the PT to be comfortable with.
Right.
Or the strength coach is giving a little too much nutrition advice for the nutritionist to be comfortable with. Or the PT is moving a little bit too much into what the strength coach is trying to do, or whatever it may be. But I think
Right.
that whole model is where we need to be moving. Because, like you said, it has to be athlete-centered about the kids and what you're doing to help them be better, healthier, whatever it may be.
100%. I mean, again, And I don't think I'm biased. I'm sure there's some bias in there, but I think a strength and conditioning coach is the only one of that group who's been exposed to everybody else in that group and has had some role in there. I mean, the second chapter, or second part of the semester in exercise phys 1A is nutrition. We're exposed to it right away. And we've been, the sports nutrition thing is not new. It's not new. And we were the ones that were doing it. I mean, we were doing it by ourselves, and in some cases, still doing it by ourselves at many, many places, professional and collegiate. We work in the world of rehab because we have to learn how to make that return to play. I mean, there's rehab, and then there's training, and then there's that link in between where you kind of cross-pollinate. And when I was with the Oakland A's, when they were ready to go, when they were pain-free, I did the rehab. But under the trainer's, not guidelines, but under his restriction and limitations. And he trusted me because he knew that I'm the one that knows how to get guys to run. I know what to look out when they run. I mean, that makes complete sense. That's what we do. We're biomechanists. We know what we've seen there. Sports psychology, I mean, I don't know any coach who wouldn't say that part of our job is psychology. Every one of us does it every day. Every sport coach does the same thing. But we also look at it in terms of athletic performance, sports performance, general motivation. I mean, all these things. So I think we're the ones, again, I don't think a guy who's, hey, I'm a strength and conditioning coach for 4 years, I can run that model. I don't believe that to be true. I don't know what date that is where you say, okay, I could be the one that runs the sports performance team. But I think an experienced, successful strength and conditioning coach can do that. I don't think it has to be somebody with a lot of years and not successful. On the other hand, I'm not sure that, years is the biggest piece of it, but when you have the two together, they're the ones that watch. I mean, who else is going to understand what we do?
Right.
And we do it every day. So that bi-monthly meeting that you're going to have with your supervisor, that's not going to help anything. I mean, you know how many things happen in a 2-week period? So the director should be a guy who's got that strength and conditioning expertise. Well, we're working with those guys every single day. If we're not lifting, we're conditioning. And if we're not lifting and conditioning, or just lifting, just conditioning, we're at practice, warming them up. We're watching that. I mean, there's so many. I mean, we see these guys every day. Athletic training doesn't see every kid every day. Academics doesn't see every kid every day. They have nutrition every single day. Do we have enough nutritionists to walk those kids around? No. But we have a strength coach that's in charge of every team. So it just makes sense to me. To me, that's kind of where the science exits the door, and then just common sense comes in. I would be the first one to advocate for a strength and conditioning coach or a super experienced background in that area to run that model.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that, and if not, it would have to be someone who would be able to put that hat on as well. If they're not specifically a strength coach, someone who at least like a PT who's got good strength and conditioning backgrounds to them, I think would be a good person as well.
I would agree.
I think what you see now, though, is a lot of people who just have the experience in either readiness monitoring or athlete tracking. And although I think that's very good and very important, what you're looking at, though, is just kind of, what's coming out of the oven. You're not looking at how you're baking the cake.
No question. I mean, that's a great analogy, and that's unfortunate. I think strength and conditioning coaches, if you're going to be really good, you got to speak the language. You got to know what the difference between a two guard and a wing is. You got to know what the difference is between the 50 free and the 100 free long course. I mean, you need to know what that means, and so that when those, like you said, those numbers come out, you can get the math department to figure the numbers out. I mean, but understanding what those things mean are the biggest part of what we do. That's how we write programs. That's how we determine fatigue and preparation and peaking, by knowing the positions. The programs are different for different spots, different times of the year. That's a thorough understanding of the science. So yeah, I mean, we got to be able to speak. We have to be able to speak athletic training, sports nutrition, sports psychology, and really those other disciplines. They don't need to know how to speak what we do. They're not. They're not a big part of that.
No, that's fair. And you got to be able to speak the sport too.
Yeah. I agree with you.
I mean, that's a great point that you bring up, that you have to know the difference, because and not just that, but you have to know the difference really between what a shooting guard is for system A versus system B, because
Right.
how our kids operate, I mean, or defenses,
Right.
like especially in hoops. I mean, say we make the switch from what we run now, and it's like all of a sudden it's like we're going to be like Syracuse and we're doing nothing but a straight 2-3 zone. Well, all of a sudden the bioenergetics of how you play is 180 degrees different.
Right.
Or go from what we do to straight man or whatever it may be. So understanding those thoughts, like the technical tactical end of it, is just as important. And there's, not to talk down on what other people do, but there's limitations in what they would need to have knowledge wise based on those situations for what their role would be within the actual improvement of the student athlete.
No question.
It's yeah, I think that all of that is super interesting. And if people haven't read the article, stop, scroll down. It's going to be verbatim right below here.
Okay.
Or you can go to, it's strengthcoach.com, right? Anthony Reyna's page.
Yeah. I haven't
And
seen it there yet, but he just texted me and said, put it on. I said, go for it, dude.
right, and if Anthony's okay with it, we're going to post it for full on this Facebook page and on our website. So we really appreciate it, Coach. It's a great piece. I appreciate you taking the time today, man, and we'll be in touch really soon, my friend.
Yeah. Can't wait to get up there to the Central Virginia backyard barbecue.
Yes, sir. It's gonna be great. Hitting leadoff now. So just so you know, it's be there early Friday afternoon, folks. Coach Alejo's hitting leadoff. He'll be ready to go. Bring your thinking caps, and of course be ready to talk stories and shop afterwards over a soda pop or two and some burgers and dogs.
Excited, man. Thanks, Jay. I appreciate you asking me to be on.
Hey, appreciate you being on, Coach. Great seeing you, bud. We'll talk soon.
All right, brother.
Take care.
Later.
And a huge thanks to 2016 presenter and NC State Assistant Athletic Director and Director of Strength and Conditioning, Bob Alejo, for taking the time to talk with us. Guys, and I think he raises some really good points and some interesting questions, and we'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are on it. It is something that, I mean, Bob's been around and he's seen it all, and he understands the history of the whole situation. So hearing his take on it, I think, is really important. So I'd love to hear your feedback. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the talk, please share it in the social media outlet of your choice. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, anything, fire them below. Bob's not a guy that's going to hide. If you have questions, he's going to answer them. And to be honest, he's a big reason behind what we do here with the podcast. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to sit down and talk with Bob and hear him and pick his brain about these things. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did and are as excited that Bob will be here on campus July 15th and 16th to hit leadoff for the 2016 seminar. Hope we can see you guys here this July. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you back here next week with another awesome guest.